Ladies and gentlemen, dear guests and participants, good morning. My name is Ignacy Morawski. I'm Director of SpotData, an analytical center specializing in macroeconomic analysis, and at the same time, the Chief Economist at Puls Biznesu, the Polish business daily, which is an owner of SpotData. We are meeting today to present our report, which we have prepared together with Skanska, Commercial Development Europe, the leading office developer in the CEE region. The report is titled 100 Most Important Trends in the CEE Economies. And its aim is to give insights into the most important economic developments in the region, and also to inspire readers to make their own analysis about the countries covered in the report. We want the publication to have a very practical aspect, to supply data and ideas that could be used in a decision and analytical processes in companies which are active in the region. The link to the report will be demonstrated at the end of my presentation and also sent to you via an email. I will present the key points of the report within the next 10 minutes, and then we will have a discussion with our fantastic guests whom I'm going to introduce now. So with us today is Arkadiusz Rudzki, Executive Vice President, Leasing and Sales, Skanska Commercial Development Unit in CEE. Hello. Next, we have Piotr Bielski, who is a Director of Economic Analysis Department at Santander Bank Polska.
Good morning.
Good morning. Together with us is also Anna Duchnowska, Managing Director, Asset Management Europe at Invesco Real Estate. Good morning.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
And Jacek Cleverness, Co-founder and Honorary President of ABSL. Good morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Here with us today is also Petra Mahartova, who will monitor your questions in the Q&A session. So please feel free to get involved in a discussion with us. We will answer your questions. And one important point, the webinar is recorded. So let me start with the presentation of our report. The agenda is the following. First, I will say a few words about the global environment. So in what conditions are we today in terms of global economy? Then I will talk about CEE during COVID crisis and afterwards. By CEE, it's important to mention, we mean mainly Poland, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. Then I will try to describe what are the most dynamic sectors. So I will demonstrate the economic developments through the business perspectives, which parts of the economy grow at the fastest pace. And then I will speak shortly about the role of two very important megatrends that we think will define the coming decade: digitization and energy transformation. So let me start with global environment. I think the most important fact about global economy, the fact that also influences Central Europe, is that the effect of pandemic crisis was less harmful than expected. What you can see in the chart is the path of GDP in OECD countries. So this is the group of 33 most developed countries in the world. The pre-pandemic trend in the red, and then following forecasts by OECD. So a year ago, the OECD was forecasting that there would be a double-dip recession, sluggish growth, and large gap between the actual economic activity and pre-pandemic trend. But the following forecasts were substantially increased. You can see that December forecast was much higher, and March 2021 forecast was even higher. And I suppose that the next forecast in June will be even higher. So we are gradually approaching the pre-pandemic trend, and the condition of the global economy is better than expected. Strong fiscal and monetary support and the shift of consumer spending from services to goods helped to maintain GDP growth. Now, going into CEE, I start with the demonstration of two important aspects of the pandemic crisis, which is human loss and economic loss. In this matrix, you can see each country of the European Union in terms of these two variables: human loss, which is measured as an excess death in 2020, so deaths above the historical average, and economic loss on the vertical axis, which is the depth of the recession. So what you can see that human loss in CEE was much higher than EU average, especially in Poland and Czech Republic. But at the same time, the economic loss was lower than in other countries due to different sectoral structure of regional economies. So CEE has a relatively higher share of manufacturing in GDP, which was resilient to crisis, and lower share than other European countries of impersonal services like restaurants, hotels, recreation activities. And this structure of the economy helped CEE economies to maintain quite a solid economic performance. So the starting point for the revival of economic activity is quite good in the region, and the expectations are quite positive. But we will talk about it a bit more in the after the presentation. Then one of the most important trends also was very surprising resilience of labor markets. Labor markets were saved by the fiscal intervention, contrary to great financial crisis in 2009. And CEE labor markets were generally more resilient during the COVID crisis than EU average. What is particularly interesting is that Poland and Czech Republic today are two countries with the lowest unemployment rate in Europe. For Czech Republic, this might not be anything extraordinary because it has always been a country with quite low unemployment. But for Poland, it is a generational change. Only 2 decades ago, Poland had the highest unemployment rate in the European Union, what you can see on the chart. The next interesting trend is investment activity, foreign investment activity. It obviously declined in 2020, right? So the crisis brought a decline in investment, corporate investment, also in foreign direct investment flows. And you can see that on the left, right? That for FDI flows to the CEE countries declined. But what's very interesting is what you can see on the right-hand side here, is that the share of foreign direct investments in the European Union, which flow to CEE, gradually has gradually increased over the last decade, and this trend has continued over the last quarters. So in 2010, only 1/10 of FDI investments of FDI in the EU were in the CEE, whereas in 2020 that share rose to 15%. It demonstrates increasing integration and connectivity of CEE countries within the global production and financial system. So now we gradually moving to the more long-term perspective. I've talked about the crisis issues, but I want to shed more light on what will happen or what we can hope will happen in the long term. So this is, I think, one of the most important charts of the report, and one of the most important economic stories. And this is economic convergence. Economic convergence means a gradual closing of the productivity and income gap between Central Europe and Germany. In this chart, the line at 100%, the horizontal line at 100% indicates the German level. So 100% is the German level here. And you can see that in mid-1990s, the average real GDP per capita in CEE was at around 40% of the German level. Within few years, it might reach around 70% of the German level, and the trend is very stable. What's also interesting here is that there is a shift of economic importance between European peripheries. between Southern peripheries and Central European peripheries. So we might say that to some extent, Central Europe replaced the role of Southern Europe in European economic system. So, for example, there are a lot of companies in Germany which switched supplies from Italian or Spanish companies to Central European suppliers. And this is very interesting, obviously, to some extent, worrying sign for Southern Europe. And at the same time, the sign of strength of Central Europe. Now, what grows at the fastest pace here in our region? Here you can see the comparison of the structure of the economies of Western Europe, and this is the left bar, and the South and the Central Europe, the right bar. There are two key differences. If you pay attention to the details of the chart, there are two important differences between left bar and the right bar. So between Western Europe and Central Europe. The first is that CEE has much higher share of manufacturing. So manufacturing is responsible for around 18% of GDP in CEE, which is twice as high as in Western Europe. Over the last 3 decades, CEE has become a manufacturing hub for Europe. To some extent, similar to like China became the manufacturing hub for the whole world, CEE plays this role for the Western, for Europe. And at the same time, the other difference is that the CEE has lower share of services, especially knowledge-intensive services like consulting or legal advice or real estate or IT. But the key point here, and this is one of the key points of the report that we make, is that knowledge-intensive services are the sectors which grow at the fastest pace in Central and Eastern Europe. So we are in a period when we're gradually moving into being a knowledge-intensive economies. Obviously, we are at the beginning of the path. Certainly, CEE is not as knowledge-intensive as Western European countries. But what we demonstrate in the report is that brain economies in Central Europe are growing. And I would say that the brains today are the most important growth assets that determine the performance of CEE economies. And we demonstrate this through various aspects in the report. So I hope that you can see the process through various data points. And an interesting aspect here is the rate of growth of business services, right? So what you can see here is that business services exports, so how much of business services we sell abroad, growth in Poland and Romania was over 500% between 2005 and 2019. We don't have data for 2020 yet, the data comparable between all world countries. But look, what you can see is that the growth in Poland and Romania was much higher than in China and India, which some time ago were considered the centers of business services outsourcing. So the role of CEE is increasing in business services. And what's important, what we demonstrate in the report, is that the feature of the business services sector is also changing. It's not like 15 or 20 years ago, it was mostly about simple business, simple back office tasks. Today, more and more, it's about more technologically advanced tasks like R&D, software programming, managing various operations like supply chains or financial risk or even investment activities. So the complexity of business services sector is also increasing. Now, okay, maybe I will switch this slide because I would like my presentation to be concise. There are two megatrends that will define the coming decade, I think, in terms of business transformation, business challenges. The first is digitization. By digitization, I mean moving more business processes to digital world. Like the most visible aspect of this is the spectacular growth of e-commerce. But there are other aspects. By the way, the the interesting fact is that one of the hottest technological IPOs in Europe and United States this year, IPOs, I mean initial public offerings, so companies entering the stock markets, were companies from Central Europe. It was InPost, the logistical company, which made an IPO on the Amsterdam stock market. And it was UiPath, the Romanian company from the business processes automation, which made an IPO, one of the largest IPO on the US, on the New York Stock Exchange in April. So in terms of, I would say, hot digital trends, companies from Central Europe are very active and ever more visible in the global markets. But what's important is that digitization is both a challenge for Central Europe and opportunity. And an interesting fact is that we think that CEE is well placed to benefit from digitization because the software sector, the digital sector, has grown spectacularly, and the share of software sector in GDP in CEE is already higher than in Western Europe. So this demonstrates that we can benefit from the increasing expenditures on digitization. On the other hand, the energy transformation will be probably more challenging, and we are not as advantageous position as in digital transformation. All the countries in the region managed to cut the CO2, the greenhouse gas emissions substantially while growing their economies. This is a success. Here you can see the greenhouse gas emissions from 1990 rebased to 100. So this is a success, but at the same time, the very restrictive emission targets were set by the European Union will be really hard to achieve. The EU aims at cutting the greenhouse gas emissions by 55% comparing to 1990 to 2030 and 100% to 2050. And you can see that we still have to increase the effort to achieve those targets, especially Poland. So that will be a challenge. But what's interesting is that a lot of companies are introducing zero emission targets, and the sustainability and environment issues are really on top on the priority agenda for companies in Central Europe. All right, so this is these are the main points of the report. Here you can see the code which you can use to download the report. We will also share it with you in an email that you will receive after today's webinar. And now let me proceed to the discussion. I will leave the slide here with the code for a couple of minutes, and then I will change the screen so that we are visible better. So I'd like to start my my Q&A session with Piotr Bielski, who is macroeconomist, so a person with the broadest perspective. I will try to move from the broad perspective to business perspective. Piotr, what do you think are, I would say, most positive trends and risks from your perspective? What I observe in the region is that there's a lot of enthusiasm about the revival of economies. But maybe within this enthusiasm, there are also some risks which we don't pay enough attention to. How do you see the major chances and risks in the region?
Thank you. Definitely, there are always two sides of the coin. In general, I would share the optimism regarding the economic outlook for Poland and for all CEE economies, at least for the next few years. I think that we will see a sharp rebound in economic growth even before the end of this year. And once it starts, it will last for at least 2 or 3 years minimum. Why is that? First, because, as you mentioned, CEE countries already are manufacturing hubs for Europe, and they can even strengthen their strong position as manufacturing hubs, because pandemic, it seems, will accelerate global tendencies of reshoring and shortening global value chains. And if it happens, we already see some evidence of this happening when we discuss with clients and customers. And when it happens, CEE countries are the best place to invest, to build new manufacturing plants, which will service European clients, because all this reshoring process is basically moving production from very distant locations closer to consumers. And we are in the perfect spot in the middle of Europe, and that will probably it may take place because, as you mentioned, labor costs in Poland and in other CEE countries are still very competitive. We have still capacity to do it. So this is the first factor that will probably be positive for growth. Another one will be a boost in EU financing, and this is also very important because. And it would not happen without a pandemic, because before the COVID crisis started, the most likely scenario was that CEE countries will start receiving less and less funding from EU because we get richer and richer. But the pandemic has changed it because the European Union launched the recovery fund, and our countries will be one of the biggest beneficiaries of those support funds. It will add substantially to economic growth. I think, roughly speaking, it may add up to 1 percentage point to, for example, to Poland's GDP growth. Maybe not fully, maybe not one if it's not fully used by the government, but potentially up to 1 percentage point per annum. So this is also a big boost. And on top of that, I think there are also other tendencies, like, for example, change in global trade patterns and transport patterns across the world. Now we see that one of the big problems in the world economy are delays in transport, and there are bottlenecks in maritime transport, for example. And Poland is also at the perfect spot to benefit from this, because we are at the location when we can be a major transport hub between Asia and Western Europe. Ground transport. So basically, we are at the end of a railroad, and we may even strengthen our position as a transport hub for Western Europe. But speaking about challenges, I think there are a few challenges, but I think the most important is one of the most important is that, political situation, political unpredictability may trigger at some point investors' concerns, especially if it's related to, damaging independent institutions, concerns about the rule of law, and so on. I think so far it hasn't impacted the situation. But the longer it lasts, the bigger damage could be potentially on investors' confidence. I believe it will not be a major problem, but potentially it is a challenge. Another challenge could be, maybe more short-term challenge, could be that at some point economies may start, especially CEE economies, may start overheating, and if they overheat quite quickly, it may be the case that we will be in a situation when we will need to implement both monetary tightening and fiscal tightening at the very same time, which may, at least to some extent, reduce growth potential for a short period, because we will be soon in a situation when governments will have to cut budget deficits after the pandemic spending spree. And if it combines with the need of monetary tightening, it may be kind of a double whammy for the economy, at least in the short run. But at the same time, it's still not a deal done, and we'll see how it develops.
Okay, thank you, Piotr. You mentioned a lot of interesting points, like even the fact that maybe we will benefit from the crisis, from reshoring and from logistics paths from Asia, but at the same time, political risk and overheating risk, so issues to pay attention. That's my highlights from what you said. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Jacek Levernes, who was co-founder of ABSL, Association of Business Service Leaders, and I would say one of the person who had a really large impact on brain economy growth in Poland and in Central Europe, and the fact that we have a very dynamic business service sector. What's your view on the business service sector in the crisis? Is it slowing down or it's actually picking up? Could you give us some more insights about how the crisis impacted the sector from your review?
Yes, thank you, Ignacy. I think we're seeing a little bit of a repeat of the situation that we had from the other financial crisis. Basically, in 2008, 2009, first, if the ones of us who lived through that remember, everything obviously stopped a little bit for around 9 months or so, because everybody was trying to understand really what happened. Then there was a recession in between, say, 2009, 2011, 12. And actually in that period, 2009, 2012, the business services sector basically doubled in Poland and in Eastern Europe in terms of numbers of people that were employed in the industry. Obviously, because corporations were looking for cost savings for new locations, and they were going into more offshoring, nearshoring, and outsourcing. So I think we're seeing a little bit of the same, maybe not with such a force, again today. So what happened over last year, obviously with COVID and with what you have been talking about before, I can summarize that actually in three points. First, Poland and Czech and Romania, all the countries actually wind up being super resilient. So the key word, I think, in the business services sector now, one of the key words has actually become resilience. What do we mean by that? Basically, where suddenly people were required to work from home or work partly from the office, and we were actually, as a region, able to move to that in something like 5, 6, 7 days. If we look at competition, that means India, China, Philippines, other regions actually took them about 2, 3, 4 weeks to move to the point where they could actually do a lot of the services partly from home. But because of weaker infrastructure, be that internet from home, just residential infrastructure, etc., they were just not able to do that very well. And what wound up happening is that many of the service centers here in Eastern Europe had to actually pick up work for those that were typically being done in India. And that actually, lit some lamps up for many companies where they're saying, do we really want to go for the low cost and take this, resilience risk, because suddenly operations were not viable because people couldn't be, doing the services they were doing or processing the work that they were supposed to do. While actually here it went extremely well. Actually, we even did some benchmarks in some areas. It was even better actually than UK and some other countries in terms of being able to do that. So resilience, super important. Then of course digitalization, basically, or using tools like the one that we're on today, where basically now companies are saying, and that's becoming a little bit the paradigm. Okay, if you can do it from home, you can do it from anywhere. Of course, that's an extreme statement, but this is kind of the modus operandi. Rather than saying yes, it's sensitive, we need to keep this in the front office or basically in the country, and that actually loosened up some perceptions, policies, and views on how to approach what work is being done and in what way. And three, I think, although you obviously showed some graphs and charts, but matter of fact is that companies are really looking again for savings. So there's a lot of corporate review today in terms of how they can make sure that profitability will come back or will enhance. And therefore, we have already seen now new projects this spring actually coming up with new investments across the region, where you see new services coming, new brands coming in, setting up not only shared service centers, but actually more advanced centers of excellence for IT or other types of investments. And basically what that means, if we look at the whole region, I think today, across some different estimates, the industry is about 750, 800,000 people, at least, per ABSL definitions on how we approach the industry. We are pretty confident that this number will be moving to more than 1 million over the next few years, with a potential growth rate, maybe not yet this year, but next year, of even 10% or even in the low teens. So that is a very, of course, upbeat and positive, I think, view. Notwithstanding, some of those risks that were mentioned before by Piotr and by yourself, I still hope that we will be able to, welcome these new investments that we see more and more of as we speak.
Thank you very much. I see that some of your points overlap with what Piotr said, that we can actually benefit from. Look, Central Europe, I have an impression that was a region with bad luck for many centuries, and now suddenly we have so much luck that each crisis benefits the region. I would even add the point that even some political crisis in Eastern Europe benefited Central Europe because of the movement of talented workforce and immigration. So,
but maybe also something, if I can just say, one more thing which is worthwhile, because we compete, for global projects, and therefore, one thing is talking about risks and, let's say, political comparisons. We always compare ourselves to Germany, UK, and US, but actually for those projects we're competing with Philippines, India, Costa Rica sometimes, and other places. So I think in that context, some of those risks, when you look at, from a global investment point of view, are not as severe as sometimes we feel when we obviously sit here in our countries and live through what is happening.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Anna Duchnowska to maybe share with us some of the investors' perspective. So we talked from macroeconomic perspective, from business perspective, from the perspective of companies who do the business, how the crisis looked from the perspective of people who invest in assets, who take the risk of investing, and observe those risks, and I would say take investment decisions. What's your view on how the sentiment towards the region has changed, and towards the office sector in particular, because the office sector is of our special focus in the report.
Thank you, Ignacy. That's actually is a very good question, or a couple of questions I'd like to address. First of all, definitely the trend in 2020 was that investors started to wait and see, because for everybody it was kind of a shock. But at the same time, the amount of dry powder, the real estate capital ready to invest, has been growing, cumulatively growing. So just according to Preqin, at the end of 2020, there was almost over $300 billion of the dry powder capital ready to invest in real estate, simply because investors in this low interest environment are looking for the positive yields. The observation is obviously that there is a polarization between different type of assets, different classes of assets, with the logistic being the leader. But after that, office is still one of the key components of the investments on the investors' radar. Of course, retail has been struggling, and there is a very limited amount of capital interested in investing in retail, unless it is really a convenience retail. And the other trend is obviously that a lot of institutional investors have moved to residential sector, just because we can see those changes, structural changes, also with people working from home. So there is a requirement to have a better, perhaps slightly larger residentials in order to service also the labor market. So these were the trends. From 2021, from the beginning, actually, we see definitely a massive shift and much more activity from the institutional investors. Interesting observations is that they are eager to start with their local markets. So a lot of German capital who used to buy in Poland started to be very active in Germany, French capital in France, and so on and so forth. But right now we can see more cross-border investments, and this appetite for investing is growing simply because of the low interest rate environment. In terms of office and how attractive office is for the market, obviously there were a lot of debates, and I'm sure everybody, both investors and developers, have been discussing what's the future of offices and whether this is a good investment product. At the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was really scared, shocked that the offices will no longer be required, and there will be a trend of corporations reducing the surface by up to 50%. The longer we all work from home, the clearer it became that apparently this is not going to happen. But obviously, the future of offices would need to be reshaped. And there are a couple of trends which will definitely be observed going forward. So first and foremost is the different layout of offices and the collaboration element of that, with less density, with less perhaps desks, but more collaboration, creative areas. The second trend is definitely the resilience of office from the health and safety perspective, with all the ESG credentials. This is becoming much more important both for the developers. I mean, Skanska is definitely the leader on the CEE market in that, but it is really becoming a very key element of the investment decisions. So if the office is not going to meet the highest ESG credentials, the institutional investors would not simply invest in that because of different reasons. Also because of the new European regulatory requirements, SFDR. The other trend, we can see also that there is the focus on the one-stop commuting. So basically the offices which are well located with a lot of amenities around, with a lot of services around, to serve all the requirements of the future occupiers, because those future occupiers will no longer want to sit at the desk and work. They would like to collaborate. They would like to engage with anything that is happening around the offices. So these are the major, let's say, trends in the office sector. The investors are still very much interested. I mean, we've seen right now in the Western Europe, the record yield levels for the really prime, very dry core offices, which are very resilient towards all those hiccups that happened over the last 18 months. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we arrived to a point where we talk about transformations. So we've had a lot of enthusiasm, but also there will be a lot of change and adjustment. So that's interesting. I will follow up on that issue. I see that some questions are coming. I will try to put them here to our group of discussions. But let me first continue with my questions and ask Arkadiusz Rudzki to come back in time to, say, April 2020, What did you think about your business at that time when everyone worked from home, and it seemed that the office will disappear as a place where we spend time, and then how your view on that has shifted over the last year, and where it is today. So the role of offices and also your business perspectives, how your view on that has changed over the last year, from the initial shock to, I would say, some cautious, probably, optimism today.
Thank you, Ignacy. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to underline that we never lost confidence that offices will disappear, basically. So this is the first point. And I think, of course, in April 2020, in March 2020, a year ago, everyone was very much concerned. What would be the future? How the business in general will perform? We heard a lot about the supply chain. We heard a lot about the change of the sentiment. People working from home, or which they had to work from home. There was no other way to perform the business, basically. But the longer it took, so the time passed, we were regaining the confidence that our business will continue doing well, basically. And I think Anya covered quite a lot of important aspects when she said about the trends which we can observe on the in general real estate market. But I think that from our perspective, basically the pandemic, of course, it was quite severe for global economy, and there was a lot of actions to regain the growth of the economy. But basically, the pandemic, in particular for real estate sector, basically boosted some trends which has been initiated basically before. Because we hear a lot about working from home or flexible working from for the employees, and basically in 2015, Google just published the report of Workplace of 2020, and they said at that time that the flexibility of flexible working way will be the future of the business, basically. So I think that this is what has happened recently over last year. Actually, just has been boosted by the pandemic, basically, and there is no return. So this is one way only, and I think that what is the future of our business, of the office sector, basically in the real estate, is that we need to a bit change our mindset, because the offices are not anymore about the high density, as many people as possible to gain the productivity. I think that companies need to redefine the KPIs for the productivity once you want to work in the flexible way, combining all the three aspects: working from office, working from home, and work near home, or from the flex office providers, which is also a quite important aspect and trend on the market. So I think this is the biggest question mark: how we will measure this productivity, because obviously this is the biggest question mark, because the companies doesn't need offices, they need productive workforce. Of course, this workforce needs to be accumulated somewhere, and the office's role will change, as Anya mentioned. It will be more collaborative, and it will be going more into the hospitality business than just the pure, manufacturing, if we can, I would say, use this terminology, that the offices are the new factories which we have in the past, which are producing the brain power, which we have Ignacy mentioned on the very, very beginning. And here in the Central Eastern Europe region, we are in a good position, and I see that we have a lot of opportunities looking in the future, based on this what Piotr and Jacek has also said in terms of the nearshoring trends. We see also more and more business coming to the region, and looking for the modern places, offices where they would like to allocate their operations. So offices are still needed, but in a bit different form, I would say. And the other aspect, which Anya has mentioned, are the ESG credentials, which are important for investors, obviously, but they are super important also for the occupiers, because right now you need to attract people to come back to office. So how you can do that? You can provide it with the highest quality, sustainable and flexible workplace. So this is something what we are focused on right now in Skanska, to deliver the highest quality project. And thank you, Anna, for appreciation that Skanska is the leader in CEE. We do our best since many years. So we will do our best to continue. So and also I think is the one aspect that I would like to underline from the investor's perspective is the sustainability, which is super important. So the climate change risk is also the investment risk. So I think that also the investors will do a lot to reshuffle their portfolios of the projects for more, I would say, sustainable. So the focus of the sustainability from the investors' perspective will be much higher than before. And I think it's that there will be, and I hope they will be happy to pay a premium for the most sustainable projects on the market. So there is a say, don't waste a good crisis, basically. So I think when taking into consideration all of the aspects which have been mentioned, I think we're in a good position for going forward. So I'm quite optimistic.
Thank you. I think it's extremely interesting to hear from you and from Anna Duchnowska that the ESG issue has real business impact, because there have been a lot of discussions whether the ESG is just a hype or some greenwashing, but from what you say, it comes out that it's a real business impact issue. And companies must pay attention to that, because otherwise they may lose businesses. But let me proceed to, I would say, future challenges and transformations, starting already with ESG, but moving again to macroeconomic issues. And we have around 15 minutes to the end, so I maybe I would ask you to be really concise with answers. And starting with Piotr, a lot of people are interested in whether, in terms of interest rates, which are extremely important both for general investments and for real estate investments, whether we entered a new era of permanently low interest rates. That was a view like 6 months ago. And now suddenly, over the last month, people came to the conclusion that probably interest rates will be increased faster than expected. So what is the future for the cost of capital and for the interest rates? And one more thing, there are questions popping up here, and I will answer the first one, but there is one interesting question about how will the labor market supply meet the demands of the potential growth of the business services sector. So I talked about low unemployment. So I understand that the question is where the people to the, I would say, new offices and new businesses come from, if there is such a low unemployment. So maybe you will try to struggle with that issue.
So maybe let's start from the last question. Actually, yeah, this used to be also one of the long-term challenge for CEE countries even before the pandemic. Labor costs were still and are still much lower than in the West, but started growing more rapidly. Pandemic has somehow stopped this trend, but the trend will return, and this is indeed a long-term challenge, how to maintain cost competitiveness. However, the gap is still huge. What I see in the last, for example, in Poland, a recent tilt from the government seems to be that while in the past the government seems to recognize this challenge and at least declared somehow policy moves that would be favorable for switching from this cheap growth model, which is based on cheap manufacturing, to more knowledge intensive. Now the recent changes presented, for example, is this the Polish deal program, seem to be going the opposite way. I mean, those tax changes seem to be again favoring the cheapest workforce and penalizing the more knowledge-based professions and higher earning people, which is basically, well, a kind of a switch which will, at least in the short run, increase our competitiveness in this very cheap labor force, but it may make it difficult to build our strength in more knowledge-based professions. Going back to previous subject, very quickly about this energy transformation. I fully agree. It is very important. I was supposed to mention it also as a challenge, because not only in terms of cost competitiveness, for example, for Poland, which has the most dirty energy mix among all our European countries, we will lose our cost competitiveness very quickly because of cost of energy goes up very rapidly. But it's also not only cost. It's not only about cost, but it's also about awareness. There is more and more awareness among both consumers and companies across the world, across Europe, about the carbon print, and there will be increasing. I think there will be increasing interest and increasing importance of this factor. And when companies seek who to cooperate with, the very bad carbon print of Polish companies may be a burden in the future. In terms of interest rates, I think there are two perspectives: short-term perspective and long-term perspective. In the long run, I believe we will stay in the environment of relatively low interest rates. The aging population will make it, I think, more difficult to generate sustained demand booms, and in general, we will return to low interest rate environment. But in the short run, just after the pandemic hit, and just after we've produced very big stimulus on both monetary and fiscal front, it may be necessary to raise interest rates. And interest rates, I think, will start increasing next year. That's what the central banks are here for. They should keep an eye on inflation, and when it goes up excessively, they should increase rates. They will do it, I think, next year. Probably in Central Eastern Europe, it will be the rate hikes will be faster than elsewhere because we have the biggest or the fastest rebound and the biggest tensions. But it will be probably not a very long-lasting phenomenon. And as I said, in the long run, we will return to the world of relatively low interest rates because of general demographic outlook.
Thank you very much, Piotr. So we also have a question about Polski Ład. Piotr already answered somehow that it might, to some extent, generate risk for the growth model based on knowledge services and higher value-added services. Maybe this question from Richard Stevens about Polski Ład and the impact. I would direct that question also to Jacek Lewernes, if you feel like you could answer this. And also I wanted about transformations, a very short question to Jacek Lewernes. Do you think that business process automation is a risk or opportunity for Central Europe? Maybe all those works that come here from business service centers will be automated and the office will be emptied and we will lose our growth model. So the two issues, Polski Ład and the impact of process automation, of opportunities or risks for CEE. And
okay. I will try to be very concise. See we're running very quick on time here. So Polski Ład, yes, obviously as ABSL, we're very involved here as part of the Economic Council. Actually, currently, for you, in 1 hour, we have actually a meeting with Deputy Minister Govin on exactly this topic. So we're working to make sure that hopefully this is not as a negative as an impact. It's still quite a few different process steps to go to understand that some of the proposals including the tax increase for the health charges could definitely impact the middle class, or let's say the growing middle class and the knowledge-based services. So long story short, we need to make sure that we do our work and let's hope we find ways to mitigate some of those most radical proposals that have been set up. But there's still several months to go, and we will see what comes out in the end from some of those initial proposals on Polski Ład or the new Polish deal, if you want. So that's one thing. On the other thing is, several of these new investments, they are much more advanced, much more, technology focused. So yes, there will be some impact from automation in terms of reducing jobs. But remember, Poland and in Eastern Europe, the premise is nearshoring. That means we're not lowest cost, but we're trying to be the ones that give the most value in terms of services. That means we want to be in the driver's seat of actually trying to make that automation happen on those lower end jobs. And that means, if we're managing to do that, to get those expert specialists and different people, the industry may not be growing as fast as before, like I mentioned, 5 to 10, maybe 15%. But we will be having more of those high value type of jobs and also driving automation projects. This is just the nature of the industry. You need to be more efficient and more effective. Key is that also you want to be, of course, the ones that are at least trying to do those changes. And just one comment to what Anya and Arek was saying before. I definitely concur. Very important with the offices for the future. The industry needs offices, but they need to be much more flexible to be able to change, drive, find efficiencies, transform, etc. And that's what you do in the shared service and business service industry. You cannot do that without meeting people in the offices. Virtually, you can run operations, but you cannot change them, and that's actually what you need to do here. So it's critical to find those those ways, and obviously to have those areas more flexible. And as obviously Skanska has been a partner to ABSL for a long time. I still remember in 2012, 13, 14, when we were already talking ESG and green, and that's very important for the industry. So I just want to reaffirm that that's a key trend. And thank you.
Thank you very much. So some of your points are reassuring, and some, I would say, point to some risks. Risks that were at the very beginning mentioned by Piotr, political risks. And also I would like to ask Anna Duchnowska to elaborate more on the issue of ESG, which, as I already mentioned, it pops up as one of the key issues in investing. And from what I understand from what you said is that this is a real business issue. What are the risks for companies that don't meet ESG targets, or what is the real business impact of this trend on investment decisions?
Okay, so first of all, there is a massive change, acceleration in the European regulation. From 15th of March this year, there is new regulation SFDR, which would require all the investment managers, in financial investors and financial institutions to basically disclose and present their ESG credentials and their consumption, their carbon commitments from pretty much end of 2021. So there is a regulatory implication, which definitely has been driven those change and this massive awareness. On the other hand, however, a lot of institutional investors have already understood that actually the carbon will or is actually already a balance sheet liability. I'm pretty sure that very soon it will start to be measured and basically recorded somehow in the accounts as a contingency or simply a liability. And thus there will be much more focus on prevention and ensuring that actually the carbon emission trajectory development is there for every single corporation and that they have targets to meet. From the real estate perspective, I mean, real estate as a group is responsible for over 40% of energy consumption in the European Union, and is responsible for over 36, I think, percent, according to the latest statistics for the carbon emissions. So there is a massive work to be done in order to convert non-efficient buildings into more resilient buildings. At the same time, there is the whole approach to development, because obviously the development and embodied carbon produced during the development is much higher than the carbon associated with operational side of the business. So there is a massive discussion and this dilemma right now, what to do with the new developments and how to ensure that they are also having those targets of being sustainable and producing less and less energy. So, for example, in Netherlands right now there is a massive discussion whether concrete developments will be allowed in the future or whether there won't be any other solutions, including wood and natural, basically materials instead. So everybody talks about that, and it is becoming a very important factor. We as Invesco, we assess the materiality risk as part of ESG. So we have a special softwares to analyze the climate change impact. We have a special ESG due diligence checklist dedicated to those aspects. So we not only look at the environment things, but we also look very much at the social aspect of our investments and the governance around it. So, but it's not only us. I'm glad to see that a lot of people started to really take it seriously. I agree with what you said, that there has been a lot of greenwashing before, but I guess right now with the pandemic acceleration, the investors really treated seriously and started already to implement tools and matrix and KPIs to really assess where we are and what we want to achieve. So it will only accelerate.
Thank you very much. That's an interesting insight. And okay, so I will proceed to the last question, which is, I think, the question to relate to all of us, to our personal lives and business lives. As you can see, I'm sitting in the office, and it's actually some movement over there. So it's been quite empty for the last year, but it's increasing in activity. So I would like to ask Arkadiusz Rudzki, what do you think will be a role of offices in 5 years from now versus pre-pandemic time? If I had to tell the people around here what their work will look like, and or you had to tell your business partners what the business model of the companies like yours will look like, what would you say?
I think we touched this very briefly in some of our quotes, I would say. But before I answer this question, I maybe build on this what Anya has said. Just a few statistics about the energy consumption. The real estate industry is responsible for 40% of the world energy consumption and for 30% of the green gas emissions. So this is a huge responsibility on us, all of us, real estate representatives, really to step up and do something with it. And that's why there is so high focus on the ESGs and on the carbon footprint reduction. But coming to your question, I think that there are two factors, or three maybe even. First of all, the demographic change. It means that baby boomers and Generation X will not be the dominant representative of the office users. The millennials are growing up, and they will be like really the ones who are the main representatives. So we need to understand their expectations, and we know that they are very good in technology. So technology definitely needs to be embodied in this. What we have incorporated in our projects. This needs to be a lot of digitalization, connectivity, prop tech. This will be a big issue for the next few years. So we talk about the smart buildings we are self-learning, with buildings which are or the premises which are adjusting, as Jacek mentioned, in the flexible way to the way of operate, to the way of work of the occupiers, basically, and are giving a lot of information and data to the investors to be able to maintain the sustainable transformation of the project. The second aspect, I think, which is real estate business, from our perspective, office business is not B2B anymore. It's B2B2C, because right now is the key is understanding of the end user needs, basically how to attract people to come back to office. You said that your office has been empty over last year, basically. So how to convince those who are sitting at home, working from home, and feel relatively comfortable, because it's possible, but the question is about the productivity, to come back to office. So office needs to offer you more than you had before the pre-pandemic time. So this is the main shift which we need to understand, and it's super important to understand not only the occupiers' corporate perspective. I mean the cost cutting, the cost optimization, process management, so on, but also when we have the lower unemployment, and the war for talents, we need to understand, and the occupiers need to understand how to attract people to the offices. And I think that there will be like you can rate hotels on the Booking.com or whatever platform. You can be rating office buildings which you would like to work in the future. So I think this might be something interesting to watch. And
Wow.
I think I think that demand is changing due to the technology, and supply simply will follow. So we will adjust to that.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all participants. There was one last question from our guests, from participants. What will be the rate of growth in CEE? So I will try to answer. It was 4% before the pandemic, and I think it will be around 4% after the pandemic. So my view is that the pandemic will not change a lot in terms of macroeconomic trends, contrary to what was feared 1 year ago. Okay, I would like to thank you to participants of the discussion. I think it was really insightful, and some not obvious issues were raised, and chances and risks. So I think we had a fruitful discussion. Thank you to all the guests that observed the webinar, and now you can see the code to download the report. And as I said at the beginning, you will be sent an email. So I wish you a pleasant lecture and read, and I really hope that the report will have a practical aspect. You will be able to use the data that over there to use them in your business documents and analytical publications. So thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.